Good morning. Mr Castleton.
Thank you, Your Honour. The first witness this morning is Mr Scott Conlon of the RFS, and I understand Mr Conlon has been brought into the virtual courtroom and can be sworn to give his evidence.
Yes, thank you. Mr Conley, would you like to take the religious oath or the affirmation?
The oath, thanks.
Thank you. Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Mr Conlon, would you please state your full name?
Is Scott Damien Conlon?
And are you currently attached to the Riverina Rural Fire District as part of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service?
I am. Yes.
And do you currently hold the position of District Coordinator within the RFS in that particular district?
Yes, I do.
And have you, been involved with the New South Wales Rural Fire Service for in the order of 35 years?
Yes, I have.
And during that time, have you held the positions of, firstly, Deputy Captain,
That's correct.
Senior Deputy Captain,
Yes.
Deputy Fire Control Officer,
Yes.
and Fire Control Officer?
That's true.
Have you, in your lengthy career with New South Wales Rural Fire Service, attended over 100 grass and bushfires in the role of incident controller and firefighter?
That's true, yes.
And have you, as a result of that experience, witnessed the behaviour of fire under different conditions?
Yes, I have.
Have you, Mr Conlon, qualified in wildfire investigation training through the New South Wales Rural Fire Service?
Yes, I have.
And are you also an authorised fire investigator with the New South Wales Rural Fire Service?
I am.
And as a result of that appointment, have you undertaken in the order of 50 investigations of fire scenes?
That's true, yes.
Were you in 2020 tasked with undertaking a cause and origin investigation into a fire known as the Duns Road Fire?
Yes, I was.
And as a result of that investigation, have you produced a fire investigation report dated the 24th of January 2020?
Yes, I did, yes.
And do you have a copy of that report with you this morning, Mr Conlon?
Yes, I do. I do, yes.
Are there any matters that you wish to correct in relation to that report?
No, I don't.
Do I take it then that you otherwise adhere to the opinions that you've expressed therein?
That's true, yes.
Did you, as part of your investigation, undertake a site visit of the area where it was thought the fire may have initiated from?
Yes, I did.
And was that visit carried out on the 24th of January 2020?
Correct.
Did anyone else attend with you on that occasion when you undertook that ground-based examination?
Yes, so that Inspector John Baker and Group Captain Bruce Angel was with me.
And as part of your investigation into the likely cause and origin of this particular fire, did you rely upon some information from Group Captain Bruce Angel?
I did, yes.
And what was that information that you relied upon, Mr Conlon, as part of your investigation?
So it was based on that he saw the lightning strike the evening before, and then he saw the plume of smoke from his son's backyard earlier on, or around lunchtime on the 28th. And that led to us in the general area, among other things, is where we ended up.
And amongst the other things that you had regard to, did that include lightning strike data in that general area where the plume of smoke was first observed.
That is correct, yes.
And as a result of that lightning strike data, did you narrow down as a possibility as an ignition source 3 potential lightning strikes on the late evening of the 27th of December 2019?
That is true. Had three strikes in that general area.
You've recorded in your report that a dry lightning event produced both positive and negative strikes over the general area, with 3 negative strikes occurring in the Ellerslie Range location east of the O'Byrne-Ellerslie Trail. Can I ask you this, please, Mr. Conlon? What is the difference or the distinction between a positive and negative lightning strike to your understanding?
Sure. So the positive strike is what is far more powerful in terms of amperage and voltage, as opposed to a negative strike. Nonetheless, both can start and have started fires.
And do I take it that the data that you're provided in relation to lightning strikes identifies which particular strike, positive or negative strike?
That's true, yes.
Apart from Mr. Angel's account of what he saw on the 28th of December 2019, together with the lightning strike data, was there any other information that you relied upon to form a working hypothesis as to the likely cause and origin of this particular fire as part of your investigation?
Yes, so we relied on information not only from Mr. Angel, but the first attack or the first arriving crews, and also from another brigade captain, Mr. Burbage, as to where the general area of the fire was, and also the lightning activity that occurred the evening before.
When you went out to your site visit on the 24th of January 2020, firstly, can you describe the topography or the terrain in that general area as you were taking your examination as to a point of origin?
Sure. The terrain is very steep and rugged. It's the area of origin was inaccessible by any other means other than by foot. We drove to a point where we could no longer essentially push through the scrub in the four-wheel drive, and then walked from there after. But the terrain is incredibly steep and rugged.
Is it accessible by four-wheel drive or not, Mr. Conlon?
No, it's not.
Do I understand that you accessed part of the area by four-wheel drive and then proceeded by foot into that area where there was a likely point of origin?
That is true, yes.
Now, did you come to the conclusion, having regard to the information you've already referred to, together with your observations that you undertook on the 24th of January at the fire ground, that the more likely cause of this fire was a lightning strike that occurred at about 11:50 p.m. on the 27th of December 2019?
That is true, based on the location of the strike or the data, and then based on our physical examination of the general area, we discounted any other possibility other than lightning being the cause of that fire.
Based on your experience and your observations, you were able to exclude any other possible cause of ignition, such as human activity, for example?
That is true, yes.
Were you able to identify a particular tree that appeared to have been struck by lightning as part of your ground-based examination?
Yes, we did. We found a tree down a steep slope that had been struck by lightning. It was only some 35 metres from the recorded lightning strike.
All right. I might bring up a photograph that is contained within your expert report. Your Honour, it's found at page 174 of Exhibit 13A. I'll just have that displayed, Mr. Conlon, for Her Honour's benefit and others. I'll just see whether that can be magnified. Is that a photograph that you took on the day of your site visit that appeared to be a tree struck by lightning, given particular features that it presented with?
Yes, that's the tree.
And what were the features of this tree that led you to the conclusion that, more likely than not, it was the subject of a lightning strike?
Well, the very first thing that we noticed that there was completely devoid of all foliage. There was no leaf matter at all left on the tree. And then upon closer examination, we could clearly see the scarring and the track marks of lightning strikes, as of the lightning that had hit the tree. It essentially left cracks in the tree, which is a clear indicator that the tree had been struck by lightning.
Thank you. And I'll just bring up page 199. I think it's the same photograph as before, but a little clearer with a caption in terms similar to what you've just described in your oral evidence a moment ago. Now, as you undertook your examination of that particular tree, was there any presence of precipitated sap or not?
Yes, there was extensive evidence of precipitated sap, virtually laterally along the length of the tree, in numerous places around the tree, if you like.
I'll endeavour to have displayed a photograph that depicts that expelled or precipitated sap from cracks within the tree, and I think a clear example of that is photograph 211. Is the photograph on page 211 of Exhibit 13A.
Yes, yes, that displays what we can see there is a sap that has been expelled or pushed out from the tree as it's been struck by lightning. So the internal moisture and sap gets superheated as the tree's been struck by lightning, and of course it expands and gets pushed out of the cracks on the tree.
A number of the photographs contained within your report, Mr. Conlon, identify visible cracks running parallel down the trunk of the charred or burnt tree. Are those features also consistent with a lightning strike or not?
Yes, they are.
And I'll just try and bring up the best example of that, which I think is found at page 233 of Exhibit 13A. It may not be clear on the screen though, and I do apologise in advance if it's not. it may be too dark to see, I apprehend.
Yes. If I may, at the very top of the tree, you can see a crack where the two red arrows are pointing, and that crack virtually travels from top to bottom, essentially at the end of the red arrows.
Yes, thank you. Now, you said a moment ago in your oral evidence that this particular tree was within about 35 metres from the recorded lightning strike. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct, yes.
And do you know what the level of accuracy is in relation to the lightning strike data provided to you and other investigators?
Yes, certainly. So it's about 95% accurate and within 100 or so metres generally.
Within that radius of 100 or so metres, were there any other trees that appeared to have been burnt consistent with a lightning strike or not?
No, there were not.
Do I take it you were comfortably satisfied that the tree that we've just seen a number of images of was the tree likely to have been struck by lightning on the evening of the 27th of December 2019?
That is true, absolutely, yes.
And you've provided, have you not, within your expert report, the GPS coordinates of that particular tree?
I did, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Connell. They are my questions. There may be some other questions from other counsel, so please bear with us.
Mr. Newton.
No questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Mr. Conlon. You're excused.
Thank you.
Your Honour, that concludes the oral evidence in relation to the cause and origin of the Duns Road Ellerslie fire and the East Ernie Creek fire. Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material contained within Exhibit 13, capital A, and the oral testimony from Detective Senior Constable Peter Alexander, Detective Sergeant Sean Clark, and RFS Fire Investigator Scott Conlon. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address Your Honour on the cause and origin of the Duns Road and East Ernie Creek fires. In that regard, I can foreshadow now to Your Honour and to my learned friends that a formal submission is likely to be made that the area of origin of the Duns Road fire was in a privately owned pine plantation known as Takajo near Adelong in the Ellerslie Range, approximately 1.5 kilometres east of Goulburn Ellerslie Fire Trail. The cause of the fire was a lightning strike on the 27th of December 2019 at approximately 11:50 p.m. Your Honour, in relation to the East Ernie Creek fire, I can foreshadow that a formal submission is likely to be made that the general area of origin was in an area proximate to the Bogandera Nature Reserve in East Ernie, approximately 18 kilometres south to southwest of the township of Tumbarumba. The cause of the fire was a lightning strike on 31 December 2019 at approximately 3:05 p.m. Your Honour, I request that Your Honour stand these two fire inquiries over generally to be heard on the 5th of September 2022.
Yes, I do that now. Thank you, Mr. Castleton.
May it please Your Honour, that concludes those two fire inquiries. Could I now invite my learned friend, Ms Stevens, if it's convenient to Your Honour, to open the inquest into the death of David Harrison.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms Stevens.
Thank you, Your Honour. This is the inquest into the death of David Harrison, a resident of Goulburn. He was staying at his friend's property in Wandolga and died after the fire reached that property on the 4th of January 2020. We wish to acknowledge the Harrison family who are participating in these proceedings today remotely. David had 3 older brothers, Michael, Peter and Warren. Peter will give a family statement later today. Your Honour, David grew up with these brothers and his mother in Goulburn. He did very well in school and was a very talented sportsman. He lived in Goulburn and worked in Canberra. It is clear from the evidence before the court that he had many close friends, was very close to his brothers and his many nieces and nephews. Some of these close friends he had made as far back as school and even kindergarten. And he was in regular contact with a number of them in the days prior to his death. Your Honour, David spent Christmas of 2019 with Peter, one of those brothers, and the extended family in Sydney. He then returned to Goulburn and drove to his friend Jeff Purcell's property, known as Strathvale, in Wandolga. Jeff was a close mate from boarding school, and David visited the property regularly. Jeff had grown up on this property with his family, and he continues to live there today and operate his farm. Your Honour will hear that Jeff's mother, his partner Belinda and daughter were all present at the property in the days leading up to the fire. Your Honour, I pause and show the court a satellite map of the property in the surrounding area. And if we just zoom in a little, Your Honour will see in the top left-hand corner, zoom out just a little. The top left-hand corner, a blue marker, which is the likely origin of the fire. And then towards the middle of the map in yellow, that marker is Jeff's property. The orange marker is also present on the screen, and I'll come to those locations in a moment. Your Honour, Jeff was at his property over Christmas and in the days leading up to David's arrival. He says, and this is from his statement, that on Sunday the 29th of December, I recall waking up and going about my daily routine. Once I walked outside around 8 a.m, I noticed there were embers, or rather burnt leaves and ash on the ground, which I assume had blown in from the Duns Road fire. Your Honour will hear from Jeff Purcell shortly in regard to his observations of the Duns Road fire and the events that followed. Jeff continued in his statement to say, I was able to smell a small amount of smoke in the air. It made me concerned the fire was closer than I had expected. He goes on to say, throughout the day I listened to the local radio and tried keeping up to date with the spread of the fire. I was also monitoring the Fires Near Me app on my phone, so I was up to date with the spread of the fire. The weather on the Sunday, and again this is the 29th of December, was hot again in the high 30s. While there were no warnings issued for my district, I guess I was on alert and ready and preparing in case something eventuated closer to home. Your Honour, David arrived at the property on the 30th of December. Jeff says in his statement that on this day, that is the day that David arrived, they continued to monitor the fires. And he says that throughout that night, I spent most of the night up with David and keeping an eye on the property and the spread of the fire. The fire was still at a distance from my place. All I could see was the glow of the fire, and I imagine it was still about 20 kilometres away and appeared to be heading in a southerly direction. Over the coming days, both Jeff and David continued to monitor the fires and socialised with some friends, including Jeff's family and his daughter. They say they could see the fire still burning in the west and they continued to monitor it on the Fires Near Me app. Jeff says in his statement to police that on Tuesday morning, the 31st of December, I received my first message from the RFS. It stated, residents around Tumbarumba and surrounds are advised to seek shelter as the fire arrives. Jeff says that Tumbarumba is south of my property and consistent with my observations of the fire travelling in a southerly direction away from my property. It seemed like the fire had gone past and wasn't a threat to us at this point. David and I discussed the threat from the fire. David and I decided that we would stay and fight and David would help me. And pausing there, Your Honour, you will see from the material and the brief of evidence that David had quite a long history of spending time in this area and knew the property well. David and I spent the day preparing the house, livestock, sheds in case the fire was to come back at us. By this time, we were moving everything to central locations to make it easier for the property should the fire come through my property. My mother also lives on the property with me in another house. I packed Mum up ready to go to Tumut to stay with friends. David and I talked about what we would do to fight the fire, and we did not have a written plan as such, but one nutted out in our heads, which we discussed in detail. We were continually monitoring the weather, wind and fire conditions and altering plans to suit. On the property, I had a 1,000-litre firefighting unit on a trailer, a 6,000-litre tank and pump on a truck, and a 600-litre firefighting unit on my Land Cruiser. On New Year's Day, the property was very smoky and the fires had moved closer to the area. Jeff's partner Belinda took a photo from the porch of the main house at about lunchtime on New Year's Day. And Your Honour will see this photograph. The following day, the 2nd of January, David and Jeff assisted Jeff's mother to leave the property due to increasing concern about the fires. Jeff says of that morning, I woke and went out mustering. It was still smoky, visibility was bad, and the smoke was burning your eyes. There was not as much smoke as the day prior. Dave helped my mother complete packing her car to prepare to leave. Jeff says, we received text messages at 2:40 p.m. and 3 p.m. from the RFS advising Batlow and Wandolga residents to leave now. After receiving those messages, Mum left and went into Tumut. David and I went into Tumut to get supplies such as food, fuel and water. That night, the smoke was quite thick and there were a lot of embers in the air. We were still on alert and keeping an eye out throughout the night. The following day, that is the 3rd of January, Jeff and David continued to prepare and protect the property. They moved cattle from the farm. They continued listening to the radio and communicated with neighbours. Jeff goes on in his statement, the conditions on Friday were still very smoky. I received another message at 5:12 p.m. from the RFS saying Batlow Wandolga residents to seek shelter now. Again, we continued watching the fire and looking around the property for spot fires. I recall that when you had a torch out at night, the light was like a wand through the smoke and you could see all the embers and ash floating through the air. That night, we could not see the fire or the glow through the thick smoke. We really had no idea what direction the fire was. From my observations through the day, we still believed the fire was some distance away and not a threat at that time. I still thought it had gone past us and while concerned about it, I was kind of relaxed and thought we were safe. Throughout this day, this is the 3rd of January, David was in regular contact with a number of his family and friends, and Your Honour has the benefit in the brief of evidence of his mobile phone records that attest to that. A neighbour, Phil Hodges, drove to the property and spoke with both Jeff and David. Phil says that they were well aware of the approaching fire and had planned to remain at the property in order to protect it. On the 4th of January, Your Honour, which is the day that David ultimately died, the temperature was hot from very early in the morning. At around 1 p.m. that day, the property lost power. Jeff and David prepared their water tanker in the cattle yards. From their vantage point, they could observe the fire approaching from the south. As Jeff says, Saturday morning came and the day started out very hot. The temperature was hot from the beginning. It was in the mid-30s first thing in the morning. It never really cooled down overnight. David and I went over our fire plan again and went through the motions and familiarised ourselves with our evacuation plan and where all our equipment was. We again checked all the pumps and ensured they were running. At 3:16 p.m, David received a message from the RFS along the same lines as those received in the previous days. Jeff took a photo that afternoon of the conditions, and that photograph is at page 68. Your Honour will see the fire over the hill. He took a number of other photographs across the afternoon, and the last photograph that he took was at 3:54, and Your Honour will see the significant progression over that afternoon. The road in the foreground is Battler Road. I expect Your Honour will hear from Jeff Purcell that this photograph was taken from the vantage point. At the same time that that photograph was taken, or shortly thereafter, Jeff took a short video of the area. Your Honour will show the video now, and I note that at the very end, David appears briefly and comments. Your Honour will hear that the fire jumped Batlow Road and into Jeff's property about 10 or 15 minutes after this time. Jeff and David then returned to the main property, and he took a photograph of the main property that demonstrates the fire encroaching into the top paddocks. This photograph is at page 69. Jeff says in his statement that he and David then got in their car and drove a westerly direction towards the front gate. However, they then saw the cattle yards and the hay shed on fire and drove up in an attempt to save them. They remained at the property for at least another hour or so. Jeff will give evidence shortly in regard to the events that unfolded thereafter. By way of chronology, Your Honour, Jeff says, "We got most of the fire knocked down and patrolled around the sheds and houses, putting out anything that was still burning. The cattle were in the house paddock and running back and forth over the fire. We tried our best to get most of them out. It was strange in that the fire was not burning quickly through my property. The wind had calmed significantly. The air was thick and smoky. There was no oxygen in it. It was hard to breathe, and I noticed I was lacking strength. It was quite a strange experience." In Jeff's statement, he explains that he tried to save the hay shed and then returned to the main house and located David sitting on a step near the water tank. He says that David looked exhausted. They sat and drank some water. Jeff then returned out to the property to fight the fire around the hay sheds, under the assumption that David had refilled the tank. At around 6:40 p.m, Jeff realised the tank had not been refilled and he returned again to the main house. He found David sitting in the front passenger seat of the Land Cruiser, unconscious. Jeff got into the Land Cruiser and drove with David towards Tumut. At 6:53 p.m, and as soon as he had mobile phone reception, Jeff called 000. While driving in the car towards Tumut, Jeff flagged down a police car heading for Batlow. The two officers who attended observed that David was not conscious, was not breathing and did not have a pulse. One officer commenced CPR on David while the other left the area in order to get radio reception and call an ambulance. Your Honour, if we return to the map that I showed at the outset, Your Honour will see those same markers, that is the fire at the top left-hand corner, the yellow marker is the property, and then the orange marker, and if we zoom into that area, the orange marker is Batlow Road, and that is the location of where Jeff flagged down the police officers and they assisted David on the side of the road. Your Honour, at this location, a car with some workers from Forestry Corporation of New South Wales also attended. On that day, they had been briefed to remove heavy plant from the area and personnel from the forest and post fire crews in the area to assist with evacuations and related matters. These officers had heard the radio communications and had attended to assist police. Your Honour, in that regard, Ellen Cromer, one of the workers from New South Wales Forestry, she says, "We made our way towards Wandolga at Batlow Road. Just near Mark Ferguson's house, a neighbour, we came across a white Land Cruiser ute parked facing downhill. A police car and forestry ute, 4 people and a man on the ground. I got the radio and made an emergency call and provided our location, grid reference and a summary of the team who was in attendance and confirmed access for the ambulance. While I was on the radio, my colleague Posty had exited the vehicle with the defibrillator and gone to assist. Once I hopped out and collected the eskies of iced water and offered everybody a drink. I went and got the friend of the man on the ground, who Your Honour will find was Jeff, who was being worked on, and brought him to my vehicle and cooled and calmed him down. I remained with him, talking to him and trying to calm him down while the other guys were continuing with CPR. Not long after we arrived, there was a stream of cars that came, and I directed traffic before some more police and a paramedic Land Cruiser and another forestry car arrived. I sent the other forestry car through to Tumut, who must have come from the other end. She and the others continued to monitor the situation on the ground while the paramedics were attending to David. Your Honour, it is worth reading the observations of one of these other officers from Forestry Corporation of New South Wales, Anthony Post, who was referred to in that statement as Posty. He was the fire and stewardship supervisor based out of Tumut and had worked for the organisation for 35 years. He told investigating police that Saturday was very hot and the fire conditions were the worst I had ever seen. He says in his statement to police, "The conditions on the day were anticipated to be extremely bad. We had to remove all heavy, non-essential plant out of the path of the fire. We had air support for the morning, and they were spotting and bombing the fire and relaying observations back to us about fire behaviour. The morning was quieter than I expected. I started to think that maybe we had made the wrong call by moving all of our plant out of the way. The night shift crew had implemented backburns and were blacking out the backburn and patrolling. As the day progressed, the weather changed and the forecast was spot on. The day became very hot. It was well and truly near 40 degrees. I remember looking at the temperature gauge on my car and it was reading 47 at one point. Your Honour, at 7:15 p.m, the paramedics arrived in an ambulance and further attempts were made to resuscitate David. He was taken to Tumut Hospital by ambulance and pronounced deceased. The brief contains an autopsy report and toxicology results from blood samples taken at autopsy. These toxicology results confirmed that David had elevated levels of amphetamine and methamphetamine in his post-mortem blood. The cause of death was combined effects of methamphetamine use and hypothermia, that is, the overheating of the body or heat stroke. It is not known when David used amphetamines and the circumstances in which he did so. Jeff did not have any knowledge of David using amphetamines while at the property. There is no evidence that David was adversely affected by drugs on the day of his death or in the days prior. There is a clear body of evidence that demonstrates the temperature was extremely hot on the day of David's death, over and above 40 degrees, with a lot of heavy smoke in the air. David spent a considerable time exposed to these extreme conditions on the 4th of January 2020, while endeavouring, together with Jeff, to save Jeff's farm and his cattle. Your Honour, I call Jeff Purcell.
Thank you. Mr. Purcell, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, thank you. The court officer will just ask if you'd like to take the religious oath or an affirmation.
The religious oath.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Purcell. Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Purcell. Now you'll hear from Ms. Stevens.
Mr. Purcell, can you hear and see me?
Yes, I can.
Will you give your full name to the court, please?
Jeffrey Lloyd Purcell.
We can't see you at the moment, Mr. Purcell. You can see us, I think you just said.
Yes, I can see you guys. We're just working on the camera here at the moment.
Have you got someone there to assist you?
Yes, yes, there we go.
There you are.
Thank you. We can see you now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Purcell, will you give your full name to the court, please?
Jeffrey Lloyd Purcell.
And your address?
Strathvale, 5000 Batlow Road, Wandowna.
Mr. Purcell, did you make a statement to police on the 4th of March 2020 in regard to these fires and the death of David Harrison?
Yes, I did.
And Mr. Purcell, have you had the benefit of reviewing that statement in the days leading up to today's evidence?
Yes, I have.
In your statement, Mr. Harrison, you give some evidence at the outset about your experience of fires on the property. I'll just start by asking you, how long have you lived on that property?
I've lived on the property all my life, 47 years.
And can you tell the court, from the benefit of that experience, had you encountered bushfires on the property before 2019?
Yes, mainly a grass fire many years ago that we experienced, and yeah, it was probably burnt maybe 30 or 40% of our place.
And did you stay at your property to fight that fire at the time?
Yes, I did.
And can I ask you, in regard to the fires of 2019, once the fire had passed, what was the state of your property?
We were completely burnt out.
What about the main house?
We saved the main house and a couple sheds in my place as well, just about 200 metres apart from each other.
And what did you lose?
We also lost fences. We had an orchard sheds and machinery and dozer and also stock loss as well.
And are you a member of the RFS in the Wandolga Brigade?
Yes, I am.
And how long have you been a member of that brigade?
Around 20 years.
And in your capacity as an RFS member, have you fought any fires in the area over that time?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell the court, how do those fires compare with the fire that came to your property in January of 2020?
The fire that happened over that period was way more fiercer and out of control compared to the other fires, were mainly grass fires, and they were easier to control, where this fire was way bigger than anyone would have thought.
I just want to ask some questions about the days leading up to the 4th of January. Now, can you tell the court, when did you first become aware of the fire that we're referring to as the Duns Road fire?
On the 28th, when it actually started, on my girlfriend's property. And so I was aware of when it actually started. So we knew that there was a fire in the region. So, early that the 28th or 9th of December.
I'll just show a photo up on the screen. Just one moment, Mr. Purcell.
Yep.
Can you see that photograph?
Yes, I can, yes.
And can you tell us who took that photograph?
That was my partner's father. It was out near Duns Road. That was where the initial fire started, out on Ellerslie.
So was that photograph sent to you on the 28th of December from your partner Belinda?
Yes, it was.
And did you talk to her and any neighbours about the fire on that day?
Yes, I rang James, my partner's father, and asked, whether he'd needed any help or is everything okay. So he responded that he was okay with it at the time.
And the next day, that is Sunday the 29th, in your statement you say you recall waking up and going about your daily routine, and when you walked outside around 8 a.m, there were embers and ash in the air and on the ground. Can you tell the court what were the conditions on your property on that morning like?
Yeah, the day was very warm as well, and yeah, the embers on the ground and made me realise that how close things were getting without seeing too much smoke at the day. Like the day was wasn't as it wasn't very smoky at all. It was just the embers in the paddocks and close to our farm houses.
And where did you estimate the fire was on that day?
It was at least
Distance from your place?
At least 20 to 30 kilometres away.
So is it fair to say that you were concerned but not overly so for your property at that time?
Yes.
And is that the day that David came to your place from his house in Goulburn?
Yeah, Dave arrived on that afternoon on the 29th.
And just tell the court, if you will, Mr. Purcell, is this a regular thing? Did he come and visit you and your family quite often?
Yeah, that was Dave's bit of get away from being in the city sort of thing. So he loved coming up and just hanging around on the farm and enjoying life on the farm.
And so about how regularly did he come and stay at your place?
At the time, we were sort of catching up at least every month, if not every sort of fortnight sort of thing. So yeah, he loved coming up to the farm.
And he was a good friend of yours. Was that from boarding school?
Yes, yeah.
If you can, Mr. Purcell, will you tell the court a little bit about David as a person?
Yeah, Dave was he was one of my best sort of mates. He had a lovely nature. He was so kind, and he'd give everything to anyone to help, and yeah, and he was always open arms, loving guy. He couldn't fault Dave. He was always there to help. He was my logistics sort of mate, so he would help me with those sort of things. And yeah, I couldn't fault Dave. He was part of our family, really.
So when he'd come and visit, not only would you have a good time, but he would actually help you on the property, on the ground?
Yeah, like he was sort of just my right-hand man. He didn't sort of whinge or whine. He'd just go along with whatever I was trying to do at the time, and try his best to be just a helping hand.
I think in your evidence, sorry, Mr. Purcell, I think in your evidence later in your statement you say when you all decided that your mum should leave the property, he helped arrange her belongings and helped her to get to Tuban. Is that right?
Yes, he did.
So, Mr. Purcell, thank you for that evidence. If we move on to the next day, which is the 30th of December, is it fair to say that you and David were monitoring the local media and that Fires Near Me app about the progress of the fire?
Yes, we did.
On the 31st of December, in your statement you say you received your first message from the RFS, and it was along the lines of residents in Tumbarumba and surrounds are advised to seek shelter as the fire arrives. How did you respond to that warning on that day?
We were reasonably concerned, but as I have different viewing points on the farm, so we could actually see how far the fire was and how far the smoke was away. So we were actually concerned, but not overly concerned.
And you say that you and David discussed the threat from the fire and that you had decided you would stay and fight and David would help you. Can you tell the court a bit more about the plan that you had in case the fire was going to get to your property?
Yeah, we always spoke about which way the fire would be coming and which angle we would leave if we were to leave. That we were never going to be in any danger if the way the wind and the fire itself was in the bush and the pine. So we were out in the open country, so we wouldn't be in as much danger as if we were in the pine or in hardwood. So we were reasonably okay with how it was at the time.
And what resources did you have on the farm to help to fight the fire if it eventuated?
Yeah, we had our firefighting unit on a trailer. I had my tipper truck with a 6,000 litre tank and also a Land Cruiser with a slip-on 600 litres. So we were reasonably organised and kept starting those pumps and making sure everything was ready and no problems with when it came to if it did come to the crunch.
And on that next day, which was New Year's Day, you've shown investigating police a photograph that either you or I think Belinda took from your property. We'll show you that photograph.
Yep, I can see that one.
And where's that taken from?
That's just outside of my place, and that tree's probably maybe 100 metres away from our place.
And that was in the middle of the day on New Year's Day, was it?
Yes, that's how thick the smoke was, and yeah, it was hard to actually know where the fire was at when the days were like that sort of conditions.
Now, on the next day, that is the 2nd of January, you've said that you woke up, it went out mustering, it was still smoky, visibility was bad and smoke was burning your eyes. You received 2 more RFS messages that afternoon. Did you speak with David about your fire plan at that time?
Yeah, we always spoke about it. We were always monitoring where it was, and always would say to him, we won't burn, we're in open country, we'll be safe.
So is it the case, and tell me if I'm wrong, Mr. Purcell, that when that message said Batlow, Wandalga residents to leave now, you didn't think that that was necessary because you were in the open country?
Yes.
The next day, on the 3rd of January, you moved some cattle, is that right?
Yes.
And did Dave help you with that? Did David help you with that?
Yes, Dave did help me. Once I got things closer, it was harder to, once all the stock was all close by, it was harder to muster, and the cattle were obviously distressed as well with the smoke, and so yeah, he helped me muster the cattle into the yards.
And how many cattle did you have at that time?
I had some cattle on adjustment as well, so I organised some trucks to get rid of the cattle that were on adjustment, and then our own cattle, there was round about sort of 3 to 350 head.
You've told investigating police that night This is the night of the 3rd of January. I went out to check cattle and to get a higher vantage point to check on the spread of the fire. And you took a number of photos, and I'll just show you one of those. This is at page 66.
Yep, I can see that.
Is that one of those photographs that you took? Was it in the
Yes.
evening of the 3rd?
Yes, and yeah, the fire itself was sort of as if it was parallel to us. So if anything, would have been in front of it.
So what direction is that?
That's looking. That is the southwest of our place.
And is that consistent with the direction of the fire from the previous days, or had it moved?
It was moving south as that fire was moving along in the country.
And were you more or less concerned about that progression, or perhaps the same at that time?
Yeah, we weren't as stressed as much as the distance from there to where our place was still a fair way away. So we were monitoring it, but we weren't as stressed as if it was the next day when it actually happened.
So did you consider that you needed to evacuate at that time?
Not at that time, because it was still a fair distance away. It was probably still 15 kilometres away from our place.
Thank you. I now want to turn, Mr. Purcell, to the 4th of January. And you say that the day started out very hot, and I'll just read from your statement. The temperature was hot from the beginning. It was in the mid-30s first thing in the morning. It never really cooled down overnight. David and I went over our fire plan again and went through the motions and familiarised ourselves with our evacuation plan and where all of our equipment was. What did you do throughout that morning in terms of those preparations?
We would go to where the cattle yards, it's a viewing point, so we could actually, where that video was taken, we could see where all the pine and the hardwood and where the actual fire was. So we had a good viewing point of where we could see the fire, and we had an evacuation to get out of without having a fire in our way. So we were always monitoring that back and forth every couple of or every hour or less, just to keep an eye on what was going on.
And is it the case you lost power at about 1 o'clock that day? Is that right?
Yes.
And in the early afternoon, you took some more photos of the fire, and it's from that vantage point. I'll just show you the one on page 68. This photo was taken by you, according to your statement, at 1:40 p.m.
Yes, see, that photo itself is it is more south from us, so it's actually gone past our place, heading towards the Batlow area.
So, and what did that cause you to have more comfort about it, perhaps skipping your property?
Yeah, definitely, because the wind that was coming from the westerly was blowing very hard. That I would have thought that the fire wouldn't come back at us because of the force of the wind blowing southerly or westerly, so that fire shouldn't have got to where it did.
When you say it shouldn't have got to where it did, do you mean later that day something happened that caused the fire to change direction?
Well, I think the fire itself created its own storm, and as much as it pushed it that direction, it came back at us as hard as it was blowing the opposite direction. So yeah, by my reading, I thought we were actually in front of the fire at the time.
So throughout the course of that afternoon, the fire actually became significantly closer, is that right?
Yes, it did.
I'll just show you this final photograph that you've taken, which is at page 69, and according to your statement, this is 3:54. So a couple of hours after that previous photograph.
So that is the photo of that valley that we just looked at, and that fire had come back through that pine and getting closer and, well, pretty much parallel to us as the fire was.
Sorry, you continue.
Yeah, that was where it actually was hit the smallest section of the pine, and we thought, well, maybe it's once it hits the smaller pine onto the dry grass, it should calm down because of not as much fuel on the ground.
Shortly after you took this photograph, did you make a short video?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Purcell, I might play that video now.
Oh, wow.
Could you see that played,
Yes,
Mr.
I did.
Purcell?
Yes, I did.
Was that David at the end of the clip?
Yes, it was, Dave.
So were both of you standing at that vantage point, and you've got Batlow Road just in front of you?
Yes, that's correct.
So in your estimation, from what direction was the fire coming at that time?
It was coming back from the south.
And was it at around about that time that you observed that it jumped Batlow Road, or a bit later?
That was around maybe 15 minutes later when it actually joined into from the pine to the hardwood, and that's when it actually created even more of a storm.
And did you make any particular decision at that time about what to do next?
Yeah, we went back down to my place. We gathered it all. David had his car packed. I just put in what I thought I might need. And as that fire came over the hill, we were leaving the property.
So at around, is it fair to say maybe 4:15, you had decided to evacuate?
Yes, that's true.
And I'll just show you a photograph at the bottom of page 69.
Yeah, I can see that. Now that's the fire that's come over into our top paddocks.
So that's after it's jumped Batlow Road and come into your property, is that right?
Yeah, like where that video was. Then we rode back down on the bike down to where my place was there, and that was one of the last photos I took before it actually came at us.
So is it around that time that you made this decision to evacuate?
Yes, it was.
And in your statement, you say, we drove, as in you and David, drove in a westerly direction towards the front gate. And did something cause you to change your mind about evacuation at that time?
Where that video was at the cattle yards and that, and so that when the flames came over and it came over the woolshed and the cattle yards, I looked back up and I said to Dave, I can't leave. Can't leave my stock up there to burn. So I said to Dave, can't leave. I need to go back up there and save my cattle.
And you and Dave did that, is that right?
Yes, we did.
And you did manage to save a lot of the cattle? Is that the case?
Yes, we did.
And did you together deal with the spot fires around the hay shed?
Yeah, it was mainly around where the houses were. We came back down and the spot fires were just around the houses, and so we were sort of just putting those out to try and save the 2 houses and a couple of the sheds.
I think you said at the outset of your evidence you did save those houses, is that right?
Yes, we did. We'd already saved those, and so when I decided I could go and try and save the hay shed, I left Dave at my place. Thought that he'd actually put water in the trailer to fill it up, but he didn't actually put any water in it. So that was when I left.
Yes.
So that was when I left to try and go and save the hay shed. Realised when I got there that there was only maybe 100 litres in the tank, so that's when I returned back down to my place to find Dave in my ute.
And just before we move on to your observations of Dave at that time, just in that last hour and a half when you were saving the cattle and a number of the structures up near the cattle yards, can you explain to the court how were you actually doing that? Was there a truck and a trailer, and if so, who did what?
Yeah, like I had my big truck that had the water cart on it. It was up at the cattle yard, so we hosed all that down before we left, and then we had a 1,000-litre water tank on a trailer. So we used that to drive around just to put out the spot fires.
And is one person, where does the person actually hosing the spot fires standing?
Just in the back of the trailer with the hose, and I drove up to the cattle yards and Dave was in the back. And then when we got up to there and we let all the cattle out, I got into the back and Dave was driving.
So you both spent time in the back of the trailer, is that right?
Yes, we did.
And what were the conditions like in terms of the temperature and the smoke in those hours in the late afternoon?
The temperature was the hottest I've probably felt in probably most of my life, I suppose, and the atmosphere, the smoke, and then the oxygen was taken out of the air, so we couldn't really breathe. It was so hot that the oxygen was just taken out. The fire was putting itself out onto the creeks because the oxygen was taken out of the air.
I think you say in your evidence, it was hard to breathe and I noticed I was lacking strength. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, just returning to what you said a few minutes ago about returning to the main house after dealing with the hay sheds. Now, in your statement, you say, Dave was sitting down on my step near the water tank. He looked exhausted. I asked him if he was okay and offered him a drink. Did you both sit down and have some water?
Yeah, well, I got my we had all our water bottles, we had plenty of all that ready for it all, and so I gave him a cup full of water and, you know, get that, have that. He sat down and I was like looking up at the hay shed thinking I could probably save that because the fire wasn't at that time, wasn't at the hay shed. So we both had a drink.
And at that time, Mr. Purcell, I want to ask you about your observations of Dave. Now, you were aware that the findings and the evidence in this inquest are that David's cause of death was the combined effects of methamphetamine use and heat stroke?
Yes.
Were you aware of Dave taking any drugs on that day or the days prior?
No, it wasn't.
And did you consider that Dave was under the influence of drugs on that day or any of the prior days?
No.
Now, when you came back from the hay sheds, is it the case that Dave was in the Land Cruiser?
Yes, he was in the passenger seat.
And was he conscious at that time?
I don't think so. I ran into my place and pulled the water container off the dispenser and threw it on him. And when I did that, it actually sort of coughed. So we obviously jumped into the vehicle then and headed towards Tumut.
And what did you do once you got out of your property? Did you make any phone calls?
Yeah, as I left the place, I went over one of the last grid to go out onto the main road, and as I did that, he did cough, and some water and a little bit of blood came out of his mouth, and I said to hold on, we're going to town, and we sort of got maybe 5 k's towards Tumut.
And did you flag down a police car, is that right?
Yes, that's where we met the police car coming up the hill.
So as soon as you realised that Dave was unwell, you just jumped straight in the car and did the best you could to get him to the hospital?
Yeah, like where our place is, it's bad service on the phone. So as I was leaving, there's a couple ridges that we go through. And as I got to the highest point, I rang 000 to notify them that I'm coming to Tumut or I needed help.
And did you get some assistance from the police and then later some Forestry Corporation workers?
Yes, I did.
And then is it the case that the ambulance attended to Dave, but there was nothing that they could do?
Yeah, there was nothing they could do.
And where did you go after they took him to the hospital, Mr. Purcell?
I went back to the farm. I went back to my place to see what had actually happened.
And what was the state of it at that point?
Well alight. Everything was well alight except our places that we'd saved.
And then where did you go?
Then I didn't know really where to go at the time, so I left to go to Tumut. Then I ended up had to go to the police station and make a statement or sign some papers, and then I left to go back over to Wagga where my partner Belinda lives.
And Mr. Purcell, is it a fair summary of your evidence over the course of today that Dave did everything he could to help you save that farm?
Yes, he's my hero.
Thank you for your evidence,
Yes, he helped me.
I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I'm so proud of him to what he done to help us save what we did.
Well, thank you for sharing your story about what happened on the day, Mr. Purcell. I'm sure it wasn't easy. We appreciate it. Those are my questions, Your Honour.
Thank you. Mr. Purcell, I'm just going to see if there's any questions from Mr. Newton. Mr. Newton?
No questions, Your Honour.
Mr. Purcell, I would like to thank you for giving your evidence today. I know how hard that must have been. You're talking about your best mate. So incredibly traumatic for you. We're all thinking of you today. Thank you.
Your Honour, is it a convenient time to take the morning adjournment?
Yes, we'll take a break now and we'll resume at 12 o'clock. Yes, Ms Stevens.
Thank you, Your Honour. Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material contained within Exhibit 14 and the oral testimony from Detective Senior Constable Peter Alexander, given yesterday, and this morning's evidence from Geoffrey Purcell. Your Honour will shortly have the benefit of hearing the words of Peter Harrison, David's brother, by way of a family statement. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address you on the manner and cause of David Harrison's death. In that regard, I can foreshadow that a formal submission is likely to be made that David Harrison died on the 4th of January 2020 at approximately 7:25 at Batlow Road, Wandalga, shortly after defending his friend's property from the Duns Road fire. The likely cause of death was a combination of methamphetamine use and hypothermia. Your Honour, before I ask Peter Harrison to make his family statement, I ask that you formally stand this matter over until 5 September 2022 for the stage 2 of the proceedings.
Yes, I do that now.
We should have Peter Harrison on screen. He's appearing remotely.
Mr Harrison, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, and we can see you as well. So we'd love to hear from you whenever you're ready.
And I should pause, Your Honour, and just say Peter and the family have provided a number of photographs of David and the extended family, and those will be shown while Peter reads the statement.
Do you have other members of your family that are listening in, Mr Harrison?
Yes, I do.
Your brothers? So it's
Yes,
Michael and Warren?
Yeah, Michael's in Ireland listening in about 3 a.m. and Warren's in Newcastle and other family members.
Mr Stevens. Well, I'd like to say hello to...
Of the documentary material contained within Exhibit 14 and the oral testimony from Detective Senior Constable Peter Alexander, given yesterday, and this morning's evidence from Geoffrey Purcell. Your Honour will shortly have the benefit of hearing the words of Peter Harrison, David's brother, by way of a family statement. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry...
We turn the equipment off, just for a sec.
Oh, I think what's happened, Your Honour, is Mr Harrison, if you've got YouTube on from the streaming, could you just turn it off and just remain on this link with us? I think you're on mute as well.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Did you hear what I just said?
I'm on mute, am I?
No, I can hear you. If you can just ensure that the streaming of the proceedings on YouTube is turned off, because we can hear it through the system.
Yeah, sorry. I just turned it off, sorry.
That's okay. We've got you here, and I'll ask Her Honour to resume.
Yeah, I just wanted to welcome you, Peter, and also Michael and Warren and the rest of your family and David's family here to be listening into these proceedings. I know how terribly sad it is to be hearing and going through everything that happened on that terrible day. I just wanted to let you know that we're really appreciative of your involvement and very much aware of how difficult this is, and really thinking about you and the whole family today as we talk about David and what an incredible person he is, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about him from you now, please. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Hopefully I can get through this. So David Andrew Harris, this is an abbreviated, edited version of the eulogy that Warren Harrison wrote
for the funeral and that we all contributed to.
Yep.
So David Andrew Harrison was the youngest of 4 boys, born to Janet Harrison and Robert Cramp. Unfortunately, Dad left us when we were little, and Mum did a superhuman job of raising 4 boys on her own, aged 7, 6 and 5, plus a newborn, young Dave, as you can see us looking at him there, with no money coming in from Dad and very little support from the government back then. She was our guardian angel, and we owe our lives to her. And sadly, she passed away in 2003 from bowel cancer and is sorely missed. We grew up in a small 5-row housing commission home in Goulburn with no room to swing a cat, let alone a fist. But it had a big backyard, and with 4 brothers, a street full of kids, a park over the back fence, and the Wallandilly River across the road, we were never short of things to do. We played every sport under the sun, and Mum said she got us into sport to keep us off the streets and out of mischief. A wise woman. And we got pretty good at most sports, going on to represent our town and state, with 2 of us going on to become PE teachers. Growing up in Goulburn, David was to some degree raised by the wolf pack, his 3 older brothers. We had some incredibly fierce battles in the backyard, playing cricket and footy. Dave, being 5 years younger than the rest of the pack, had to quickly learn to adapt and stand on his own 2 feet, because we gave him no quarter in the backyard cauldron. We like to believe this baptism of fire helped prepare him for the real-world challenges he would have to face later in life. It certainly honed him into a very handy football player and cricketer. But despite the sibling rivalry and fights over who was the alpha male, we have always been a tight-knit brotherhood and have remained best mates to this day, which makes the loss of our little cub so much more devastating. Dave loved all sports, but particularly his rugby, and played for many clubs, including St Pat's College First 15, ANU Rugby First Grade, Goulburn Dirty Reds First Grade, and the Tumut Bulls. He was great to watch too. A hard-running loose forward, he could really skittle a defence when he pinned his ears back. Dave was blessed with many talents. He was handsome, charming, funny, athletic, and intelligent. We all agree he was the smartest in our family, with daylight a distant second. This is a newspaper article from when Dave was elected Junior Mayor of Goulburn. In fact, he was something of a maths genius and topped his class in 4-unit mathematics, physics, chemistry, and engineering. But despite his brain power, he was never academically snobby and never let on that he was usually the smartest person in the room. He tried his hand at a few engineering degrees, but he found it hard to settle at uni and away from home. So his spirit of adventure soon called him in new directions, and his affinity for numbers saw him find work in logistics management. To many, Dave would be considered a maximizer who took his role as facilitator of good times very seriously. With no wife or children of his own, he just loved creating opportunities to bring his friends together. And there's a couple more slides. Dave really loved and looked forward to all our family get-togethers, but he was especially fond of Christmas time. Whether in Newcastle, Berrima or Mona Vale, he would rock up early with his swag and his presence and that big Cheshire Cat smile of his that would instantly light up the room. Sorry. He was definitely the favourite uncle to his 9 nieces and nephews who all loved him dearly. Our last Christmas together in December 2019, just 10 days before he died, was extra special. Our eldest brother, Michael, brought his entire family over from Ireland, and we all gathered at my place in Mona Vale to celebrate a Christmas from the very top shelf. From sailing on Sydney Harbour on Boxing Day to playing golf and backyard cricket, eating too much food, laughing, playing cards, singing, and just generally enjoying hanging out together. These will be cherished memories for us all. Dave was probably the most laid-back bloke I ever met. He enjoyed the simple things in life the most: sharing time with friends, camping, fishing, having a beer and a laugh, smiling as the world raced about him. His spoken word was measured with a generous dash of country boy twang that he picked up whilst living on the Purcell family farm near Tumut. He loved it down there, and it's fair to say the Purcells became his second family. He would take every opportunity he could to visit and catch up with his Tumut Valley friends. As you know, Dave tragically lost his life helping to protect the farm that was such a big part of his life from the Duns Road fires near Batlow. Together, Dave and his great mate Jeff managed to save the houses and most of the cattle. He could easily have left earlier, as his brothers had encouraged him to do in the days before, but he would not leave Jeff on his own. This is typical of Dave: loyal, brave, and always ready to help. We will always remember Dave for his kind and gentle nature, his sunny disposition, and his uncomplicated approach to life. He was never a burden to anyone, and nothing was ever too much trouble. Dave was a friend to all who he met. He loved people and would always take the time to see how you were, and he really listened to you in conversation. Sometimes in life we come across people who aren't famous or don't stand out in any obvious way, but there is just something about them that draws you in. Perhaps it's the manner in which they live their lives or the strength of their character. Whatever that intangible quality is, they create an indelible impression that stays with you forever, long after they've gone. Dave was one such person. In many ways, he was just an ordinary Aussie bloke, but to his family and those who knew him well, he was anything but. He was extraordinary. We will miss our little brother, our uncle, and our friend more than words can convey. Rest in peace, Dave. You're a true hero to us, and we'll see you in that big backyard in the sky. On a final note, our family want to express our sincere thanks and admiration to Jeff Purcell and the police, particularly the first responders, Senior Constables Greg Crislow and Amy Zwickel, as well as the other police, firefighters and ambulance officers on the day who tried desperately and tirelessly to save our little brother's life in such difficult conditions. We won't forget your selfless efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for those absolutely beautiful words about David. That Christmas that you had, it just looks like it must have been so special, and now, of course, so cherished.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you heard Jeff say, and it's what's really clear from the evidence is that he died a hero, an extraordinary bloke. So thank you for those beautiful words. It's always so lovely to be able to get to know someone through their family a little better. So we really appreciate it, and we're thinking of you all today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, Ronna. That concludes the inquest into the death of David Harrison. And that concludes the evidence today, Your Honour. Tomorrow, the court will hear the inquiry into the Adaminaby complex fire. Your Honour, we'll hear an opening in that regard, and then from the following witnesses: the officer in charge, Ben Waldron, the Senior Crime Scene Officer Mark Hollins, RFS Fire Investigator Mike Fraturo, and property owner Warren Menzies.
Thank you, Ms Stevens.
Thank you, Your Honour.
We'll adjourn today and we'll resume at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.